Staying at home all day. There is a very specific kind of day that almost everyone has experienced at least one. A day where you don't really go anywhere, you don't have a clear plan, you don't need to leave the house, you wake up and you stay in. At first, it feels normal, even comfortable. There is no pressure to dress up, no need to travel, no one waiting for you outside, just your room, your phone, and the idea that you have plenty of time. But something subtle starts to happen. Because when you stay in the same environment for too long, your mind begins to shrink its sense of world size. Not physically, but mentally. The room becomes the entire universe for that day, and everything you do starts to orbit around it. You sit on the bed, you move to the desk, you go back to the bed. You change positions, but not environments. And because nothing around you is changing, your brain starts looking inward for stimulation. That's when the loop begins. You reach for your phone without thinking, but not because you decided to, but because there is nothing else pulling your attention outward. You unlock it, check something quickly, close it, then open it again a few minutes later, just in case, just to check, just to fill in the silence. And slowly, your day becomes a cycle of small escapes. Escape from boredom, escape from stillness, escape from the feeling that nothing is happening. But here is the strange part. Nothing is actually wrong. You are safe, you are comfortable, you are at home, but your mind doesn't interpret stillness as peace for very long. It starts interpreting it as lack of input, and when input is low, your brain tries to compensate. So it is increases internal activity, more thoughts, more scrolling, more small decisions that don't really matter. What should I watch? What should I open? What should I do next? But none of these questions lead to real direction. They just delay time, and there is where time starts to feel different. Hours pass, but they don't feel like hours. They feel like moments that were repeated, not lived, just cycled through. You might look up from your screen and realize it's already afternoon or evening, and when you struggle to remember what actually happened in between, because there are no strong markers, no transitions, no clear events that your brain stored as meaningful, just repetition, scroll, pause, think, scroll again. That is why staying at home all day can feel strange emotionally. Not because anything bad happens, but because nothing stands out enough to be remembered clearly. And when nothing is remembered clearly, the day feels shorter than it actually was. Hours sometimes even emptier than expected. But from the outside, everything looks fine. You were at home, you were resting, you were doing nothing important. Yet internally, your brain was constantly active, searching for stimulation in a space that never changed. And the longer you stay in that environment, the more your behavior adapts to it. Less movement, less urgency, less external engagement, not because you became a different person, but because the environment stopped asking you to be one. And that is the beginning of the closed loop, a loop where everything feels familiar but nothing feels fully alive. And without realizing it, you start spending more time inside that loop than you planned, not because you chose it, but because nothing interrupted it. When you stay at home for long enough, something quietly shifts in the way you interact with your phone. At first, it's just a tool. You use it intentionally. You check messages, watch something, maybe listen to music. But over time, its role changes. It stops being something you use and starts becoming something you return to again and again without thinking. Because inside the home environment, your phone becomes more than a device. It becomes the main source of movement, the main source of novelty, the main source of stimulation. Everything outside your screen is relatively stable. Same room, same walls, same silence, same routine, so your brain naturally leans toward the only thing that changes rapidly: the feed, the scroll, the constant flow of new input. And this is where the trap begins, not because the phone is bad, but because it is perfectly designed to match a very specific condition, a still environment. When nothing around you changes, your attention becomes hungry, and the phone feeds that hunger instantly. One swipe gives you something new, another swipe gives you something different again. No waiting, no effort, no transition, just immediate stimulation. And your brain learns this pattern extremely quickly. It learns that boredom means phone, silence means phone, pause means phone. Even small moments that start to trigger it. Waiting for something, phone. Lying down, phone. Thinking too much, phone. Not sure what to do, phone. It becomes automatic, not a decision, a reflex. And the more it repeats, the less resistant there is, because your brain starts to prefer it, not consciously but chemically. Dopamine doesn't care about meaning, it cares about prediction. And your phone becomes the most predictable source of something happening. So, even when nothing is wrong, you still reach for it. Even when you don't need anything, you still check it. Even when you just used it a minute ago, you still open it again, not because you are chasing something specific, but because your attention has learned a shortcut, and that shortcut becomes the default path. This is why time inside the home starts to blur even more. Because now your attention is not only inside a static environment, it is also fragmented into constant micro shifts. Scroll, stop, scroll, switch app, scroll again. Each shift is small enough to feel insignificant, but together they create mental noise. And that noise prevents a deep awareness of time passing. So when you finally look up, it feels like the day moved faster than expected. But in reality, your attention was simply divided into too many small pieces to form a clear memory of it. There is also another layer. Inside the home, there's no natural limit to phone use, no social boundary, no physical interaction, no external requirement to stop. So unless you consciously decide to stop, there's nothing in the environment that forces a pause. And that makes the loop even stronger. Because behavior that is easy to repeat will always be repeated more often. Not because of weakness, but because of design, and slowly, without noticing. Your phone stops being just a part of your day, it becomes the structure of your day. The thing that fills gap, the thing that connects moments, and the thing defines what doing nothing looks like. And when that's happened, the boundary between rest and stimulation begins to disappear. You are no longer clearly using your phone, you are simply inside it. Until something external breaks the pattern or the day quietly ends on its own. There's a moment that feels almost strange when you step outside after spending a long time at home. At first, nothing dramatic happens. You just leave your room, you walk out the door, you enter a different space, but within minutes, something in your mind begins to shift. Not because you made a decision, but because your environment forced it. Outside, your senses are no longer dealing with repetition, they are dealing with change. Constantly, light is different, sound is different, movement is different. People are moving in unpredictable ways. Car passes, wind shifts, voices appear and disappear. Your brain is suddenly receiving far more information than it was inside. And because of that, it has to switch modes inside your house. Your mind can drift, it can loop, it can stay internal because reality keeps interrupting it. A state where attention is more anchored to the present moment, simply because the present moment keeps changing, even if you don't try to be mindful. You become more aware because awareness is no longer optional, it is required for basic navigation. You start noticing small details again, the direction you are walking, the distance between places, the way people move past you, the texture of the environment, even your own body feels slightly more active, more engaged, more responsive. And something else also changes quietly, your relationship with time. Outside, time rarely feels like it disappears. Instead, it becomes segmented. You remember moments more clearly, not because they are more important, but because they are more indistinct. They are natural breaks in the experience, walking from one place to another, crossing a street, entering a shop, seeing something new. Each of these becomes a small pocket in the memory, and these markers help your brain build a clearer timeline of the day. So, even a short time outside can feel more real in inside than a longer time spent inside. There is also a behavioral shift. When you are outside, your phone loses a bit of its dominance. Not because it disappears, but because your attention is already occupied. You are walking, you're observing, you're reacting to the environment, and every action requires a bit more awareness than just lying down or sitting still. So, the automatic pull towards scrolling becomes weaker, not gone, but interrupted. And those interruptions matter because every interruption breaks the loop, even temporarily. In those moments, your mind is slightly less fragmented, slightly more focused, slightly more present. This is why many people feel clearer after going outside, not because outside solves problem, but because it focuses attention to behave differently. It pulls you out of internal loops, it replaces repetition with variation, and variation is what wakes the mind up. But the most important part is this: you don't need to go far. You don't need a special place. You don't need a long trip. Even small exposure to a changing environment is enough to shift your mental state because the difference is not distance, it is stimulation inside, predictable, outside, dynamic, and your brain reacts to that difference immediately. So when you step outside after staying too long, it feels like you are becoming more alert, more aware, more present. But in reality, you are simply re entering a world that demands your attention again, and that demand is what wakes you up. Once you spend enough time outside, something subtle starts happening again that most people don't notice at first. It's not just that your environment has changed, it's that your behavior begins to follow it. At home, actions are solved, there is no pressure to move quickly, no external structure forcing decision. You can pause, delay, or repeat anything at any time. But outside, everything becomes slightly more directional. You are either walking somewhere, waiting for something, or responding to something around you, and that changes the rhythm of your behavior. Even simple actions feel more structured. You walk with a destination, even if it is small. You adjust your space without thinking. You decide faster, hesitate less, and move more continuously. Not because you suddenly became more disciplined, but because the environment removes unnecessary options. Inside, you can do almost anything at any moment. Outside, you are guided by the context. And context reduces hesitation. This is why many people naturally become more productive when they leave the house. It's not motivation, it's structure. Your brain is no longer responsible for creating even every next step from scratch. The environment provides the next step for you. Walk here, stop here, look there, respond now. And because of that, your attention becomes less scattered. You are less likely to drift into endless scrolling, not because you are resisting it, but because the conditions don't support it. Even your phone feels different outside. It becomes secondary instead of primary, a tool instead of a default reaction. You still use it, but not in the same automatic loop as before. There are interruptions everywhere. People passing by, movement in your surrounding, constant small changes in what you see and hear. And these interruptions prevent deep autopilot behavior from fully taking over. At home, autopilot thrives because nothing interferes with it. Outside, it struggles because reality keeps breaking it. There is also where mental clarity begins to shift. Your thoughts don't disappear. Instead of cycling the same ideas for long periods, your mind gets reset more often by external input, a new scene, a new scene, a new sound, a new interaction. Each one slightly resets your attention, and over time, this creates a different feeling inside your head. Less heaviness, less looping, less mental stuckness. Not because your problems are gone, but because your mind is not trapped in one place long enough to overprocess them. There is also a physical layer to this shift. Movement itself changes cognition. Walking, standing, adjusting posture, all of these send signals to your brain that you are active, not static. And when the body is active, the mind tends to follow. It becomes more alert, more responsive, more connected to the present environment. This is why even a simple walk can feel like it clears your head, not in a mystical way, but in a mechanical one. You are constantly changing inputs, and changing inputs prevents mental stagnation. So, the longer you stay outside, the more your behavior adapts. You start expecting movement. You start responding faster. You start thinking in shorter, clearer bursts instead of long looping ones. And slowly, your entire rhythm shifts, not dramatically but noticeably, until you return home and realize how different your mind feels in a still environment again. And that contrast is what makes the difference obvious. At this point, the difference between staying home and going outside is no longer just about location. It becomes something deeper. It's about how your mind organizes experience. Because when you compare both states carefully, you realize you are not just living two different routines, you are living two different versions of attention. At home, attention tends to turn inward. It loops, it repeats, it revisits the same thoughts, the same absorptions, the same distractions. There is no strong external force breaking that circle. So, your mind fills the space with whatever is easiest to access. Usually, that means your phone or your thoughts or a combination of both, and because nothing interrupts it, your attention becomes referential. It feeds on itself. You think about something, you check something, you think again, and you check again. It becomes a closed system. But outside, attention behaves differently. It is pulled outward, not inward. Instead of circling the same mental space, it has to respond to what is happening around you. This creates constant micro adjustments in your awareness. You are not just thinking, not also observing, you are not just processing, you are also reacting. And that combination changes everything because attention that is directed outward tends to be more structured. It has anchors, it has points of focus, and it has physical reality to attach itself to. Inside the home, those anchors are weaker. So attention flows more easily. It drifts, it fragments, and the fragmented attention creates a different experience of time. Time feels softer at home, less defined, more continuous, but less memorable. Outside, time feels more segmented, more broken into moments, and those moments are easier to recall later. Not because they are more important, but because they are more distinct. There is also a difference in emotional tone. At first, at home, emotions often become internalized. You feel things more privately. You process things in your head. You sit with thoughts longer than necessary. This can sometimes intensify overthinking. Outside, the emotions are diluted by movement and input. You are less likely to stay stuck in one emotional loop because your attention keeps getting redirected, not by choice, but by environment. And this is the key difference. At home, your mind leads your environment. Outside, the environment leads your mind. Neither is better or worse by default. but they produce very different psychological states. One gives you depth, the other gives you flow. One increases internal awareness, the other increases external awareness. And the interesting part is that both are necessary, because a life that is only internal becomes too heavy, and the life is only external becomes too scattered. But most people don't realize they are constantly switching between these two modes without noticing it. They think their mental state is random, but often it is simply a reflection of what they are, not who they are. So the real difference is not just home and outside. It is what kind of attention are you training in each environment? Because whatever you repeat, your brain begins to normalize, and over time, that becomes your default way of experiencing the world. At this point, something becomes difficult to ignore. The idea that your behavior changes is depending on the weather, on whether you stay home or go outside is no longer surprising. What becomes surprising is something else entirely. How little of it actually feels like a choice, because if you look closely, you are not constantly deciding how to act. You are responding to space, to structure, to stimulation, to absence of stimulations. And that response happens faster than conscious thought most of the time. This is this is where the real twist appears. You don't just use environments, you are shaped by them slowly, continuously, without permission. At home, the environment teaches your brain one pattern: stay still, reduce effort, seek any easy stimulation, move, observe, respond, stay alert. Neither of these instructions is spoken, but both are learned. Through repetition, through exposure, through time, and because humans are adaptive, your brain always adjusts to what is most available. Not what is the best, not what is ideal, but what is repeated. So, if your home environment repeatedly offer comfort, silence, and digital stimulation, your behavior gradually shifts toward these options. And if your outside environment repeatedly offers movement, unpredictably, and social awareness, your behavior shifts in that direction instead. The most important realization here is this: you don't enter environments as a fixed person. You become slightly different version of yourself inside each environment. Not in dramatic identity changing way, but in a subtle behavioral patterns. How fast you think, how often you move, how easily you focus, how quickly you get distracted. All of these are being shaped by in real time. And because the changes are small, you rarely notice them happening. But over weeks, months, or years, they accumulate. And when you call personality, often becomes a collection of repeated environmental responses. This is the part most people miss. They think discipline is the main factor in behavior, but environment is often stronger than discipline. Because discipline requires effort, environment requires none. It simply continues being what it is and you adapt to it automatically. This means something very important. If you change your environment, you don't have to fight your behavior as much, because behavior starts to adjust on its own. At home, you might struggle to stay focused. Outside, focus might come more naturally. At home, you might feel stuck in loops. Outside, you might feel more active without trying. Not because you change your mindset, but because you change the conditions that shape your mindset. And it is the final shift in perspective. You are not only a thinker outside your environment, you are also a product of it. Which means your daily choices are not just personal decisions, they are responses to the world you place yourself in repeatedly. So the question is no longer why do I act like this, but instead what kind of environment is creating this version of me. Because once you understand that, you stop seeing behaviors as something random and start seeing it as something designed by repetition, quiet, invisible, but powerful, and always shaping you, whether you notice it or not. When you start moving between staying at home and going outside regularly, something interesting happens that most people don't expect. You begin to notice the contrast more than environments themselves. At first, each transition feels normal. You stay home for a while, then you go outside, then you come back again. But over time, your brain starts building a comparison system. Not consciously, but automatically. Because your mind is always trying to predict what kind of state I am about to enter. And this prediction changes how you experience both environments. When you've been at home for too long, going outside feels intense, too many inputs, too many movements, and slightly almost overwhelming at first. But after a few minutes, your system adjusts, your attention expands, your awareness increases, your thinking becomes clearer. And suddenly, the world feels more awake again. Then, when you return home, the opposite happens. Everything is slows down. The silence feels stronger. The phone becomes more attractive again. Your attention starts to drift inward, and the loop begins again. But here's the key insight: neither the environment changes you permanently. It is a transition between them that creates awareness. Because contrast is what reveals behavior. When everything is the same, you don't notice anything. But when two opposite states are experienced back to back, your brain becomes aware of the difference, and awareness is the beginning of control. You start noticing patterns like, I think differently when I'm outside, I scroll more than when I'm home, I feel more alert when I move, I feel more passive when I stay still too long. These are not random observations, they are data points that your brain was always collecting, but never labeling. Now it starts labeling them, and once behavior is labeled, it becomes easier to question. And once it can be questioned, it becomes adjustable. This is where real change starts happening, not from forcing yourself to be productive at home or forcing yourself to be mindful outside, but from understanding the switch effect itself, because your brain is highly adaptive. It doesn't need extreme change. It needs variation. Even small shifts in environment can reset mental patterns. A walk outside after hours inside, a change of room, a change of lifting, a change of sensor input. All of these act as small resets for attention. And over time, you begin to use this intentionally, not as discipline, but as designed. Instead of fighting your habits, you start changing the conditions around them. And this is the deeper realization. Your life is not just shaped by where you are, it is shaped by how often you change where you are. Because stagnation creates loops, and movement creates awareness. Even small movements, even simple transition, home, outside, outside, home, stillness, motion, motion, stillness. Each shift breaks automatically behavior slightly, and those small breaks are where your attention returns, where your awareness resets, and where your mind becomes visible to itself again. So, the real skill is not choosing one environment over another. It is learning how to move between them intentionally, because in that movement, you regain something that autopilot quietly takes away: choice.